Saw X. As the channel's self-proclaimed Saw aficionado, I've been waiting in the wings for about 6 months now to get my hands on the 10th installment of the Saw franchise. I've just got back from the cinema and I wanted to get my thoughts and opinions out to you guys as quickly as possible. As with all of our honest reviews, this video will contain spoilers, so you have been warned. And why not check out our second channel as well, The Horror Exchange, which is launching its first video very soon. Links are in the description. Set between the events of Saw 1 and Saw 2, a sick and desperate John Kramer travels to Mexico City for a risky and experimental medical procedure in the hopes of a miracle cure for his cancer. We all know about John's terminal illness from the early installments of the franchise, and this is very much the focus of the first half of the film really. The opening scene is John coming out of an MRI scan looking very frail and perplexed at the extent of his illness. Tobin Bell does look a decent amount older in this movie. I mean, his character is supposed to be in his early 60s in Saw X, but he's actually 81 now in real life. The makeup crew really did a good job, I think, of negating this age difference, and I thought it played nicely into showing how John is a lot more vulnerable now in this film to the audience. John's always been the beating heart of Saw. He's always portrayed himself as being dominant, in control and intimidating, despite being on a drip for most of Saw 2 and lying on a bed for most of Saw 3. But Saw X begins with John appearing really desperate to save himself and almost resigning to the fact that his disease will ultimately end in his demise. He attends a cancer group and meets Henry Kessler, who has stage 4 pancreatic cancer, but some months later he sees Henry walking about freely in the city and enjoying life. Henry tells him that there's an off-grid treatment he's had called the Pedersen Project, headed up by Cecilia Pedersen, which has handed him his life back. And I must say that I really enjoyed the first half of the film. It was quite relaxing, to be honest, just delving into the mind of John Kramer and getting more narrative and character development for him, which is something I think all of us Saw fans have craved for decades now. Cleverly, we delve into John's mind with the eye trap, which has been at the forefront of Saw X marketing, but this was purely just a manifestation in John's mind when he sees a hospital worker stealing a watch from an elderly patient's drawer. This was really clever, to be honest, and I thought it was something that caught me off guard and something that the series hadn't really explored before. Normally what you see in Saw is literal, and it was a nice surprise, to be honest. I really liked this scene. But John's cancer journey takes him off the beaten track to a remote place in Mexico, which was very left field, I thought, from the writers. The people behind the Pedersen Project run their treatment in an unregulated manner, so they have to stay off the grid to avoid being closed down. John forms connections with the hospital itself and all the employees there, who he believes are doing God's work and saving people's lives. The hospital is a disused chemical factory that's been turned into a tool for saving people. This is something that rings true with John's work. He's used power plants and sewage facilities in the past and the future as part of the backdrop for some of his most infamous games, so I very much appreciated the subtle nod to this. But of course, the treatment was all part of an elaborate scam to defraud the cancer patients who have the means to pay for private procedures such as this. John is one of many victims to this scam, which he discovers when he goes back to the hospital, which he finds is now abandoned. In this is where we take a very affirmed step into the second half of the film, which has a familiar tonality to it. He dresses up in a pig mask along with Amanda and begins to slowly hunt down the employees who are responsible one by one. One of my favourite traps was probably the one involving Diego, the taxi driver, who was the transporter for patients to the hospital in the scam. He has bombs hooked into his forearms with 2 razor blades duct taped to his bare hands, and he has to cut them out of his forearms almost like he's cutting cancer out of his body. He does manage to survive this, and then John goes to help him with medical supplies, which reinforces John's philosophy in the earlier films that he's all about rehabilitation and not just mindless revenge. Something different in this installment which I noticed is is how John's very visible in all of his traps. He's just stood there behind a glass panel in Diego's trap, just watching him and waiting for the game to end. And I do feel like this took a little bit away from the horror element of the traps, because I just had this frail old looking man in the shot who I feel sorry for, just standing there while somebody else is being brutally tortured to death. It was maybe a little bit off-putting, but I am being very critical there. But speaking of off-putting, I feel like Saw X really dropped the ball with bringing back Amanda. Tobin Bell put in another brilliant acting job as John Kramer. I knew that the person I was watching was Jigsaw, and it was a delight. But my feelings towards Shawnee Smith's performance as Amanda are pretty much the polar opposite. I loved Shawnee in Saw 1, 2 and 3. She was one of my favourite characters and probably my favourite accomplice. But in this film, I couldn't help but feel like they'd casted someone else as Amanda. Now yes, Shawnee Smith is a good 20 years older now compared to her age between the events of Saw 1 and 2. But as writers and filmmakers, you have to take responsibility for the fact that you're writing a character into a film which, if we're being honest, probably didn't need to be made. And she's turning up looking 20 years older, when as an audience we have to believe that this is taking place around 2005 and Shawnee hasn't aged a bit. I couldn't immerse myself in that, and I just had to try and go along with it, even though it was incredibly clunky. The same goes with the delivery of some of Amanda's dialogue. It didn't feel like it was old school Amanda, and I did come away from the film just a little bit disappointed at that. So, leading on to the main trap. Having group games is something we've seen many times before, such as in Saw 6 with William, who is the CEO of a rather dodgy insurance firm and all of his employees are rounded up, and in Saw 3D as well, where we have the whole entourage of Bobby Dagan's Jigsaw Survivor marketing campaign also put through traps. There was of course an element of familiarity here, and I guess repetitiveness, but I was also eager to see what they were going to come up with to test this horrific bunch of con artists. And it really didn't disappoint for the most part. There wasn't really a main game, it was individual tests which got a lot of screen time, which I thought was great. Most of the time, the tests are over in a matter of minutes historically, but we really got to savour every part of it this time around. Valentina's game was first, and she had to use a wire saw to cut her thigh off, and then suck the bone marrow out of her femur to a certain level on the scale. She did suffer the consequence of getting her head sawn off though, as she didn't complete this in time, but it was a really good trap. The sound design was on point as well for this. The noises layered over the top of her sawing really added to the authenticity of the ordeal, but her acting probably could have been a lot better. She didn't seem to be in all that much discomfort in my opinion. But Matteo was next. He was the fake anesthesiologist in John's fake surgery, so he was required to cut away some of his brain and drop it into an enzyme beaker to release a key, again without any sort of painkillers. Of course he failed, and an electric mask shut on his face once the timer had run out. And the pattern on the mask I think was a nod to the Mexican statue that Diego the taxi driver had pointed out to John on his journey to the hospital. The penultimate trap was for Gabriella, someone that John had taken a shine to during his treatment, and Amanda had also formed a soft spot for her due to her drug addiction, so naturally this one was going to be brutal. She was winched up into the air with one wrist and one ankle shackled and placed in front of a radiation machine that burned her face. She smashed her arm and leg to beat the trap, but was severely disfigured laying on the floor. During all of these games, one of the previous patients or victims of the scam, Parker, comes knocking at the facility door to get his money back from Cecilia. After witnessing the games that are taking place, he holds John and Amanda at gunpoint and then reveals that he was also in on the act and wasn't ever really a patient. He was yet another prop to pull the wool over John's eyes and is actually Cecilia's partner. Now this is where things get a little bit hairy. Cecilia and Parker chain up Amanda and then force John to take Cecilia's place in her trap, put the shackle on, and then force a young boy outside the building to also join John in the trap, to basically make John suffer by seeing an innocent child die. Cecilia starts to mock John, which is quite strange to see as a Saw fan. Nobody outsmarts Jigsaw. And he even admits that the young boy Carlos, and not anticipating Parker to be an accomplice to the overall scam, was an oversight on his part. But of course, there was one final twist. As always. The final trap is a waterboarding game. Whoever pulls the lever gets waterboarded. Naturally, John tells Carlos in Spanish not to pull the lever, effectively sealing his fate. Once Cecilia and Parker accept that John is doomed, they retreat into the upper control room to collect all their stolen cash and make their exit. However, the final twist is that John has anticipated this, and the upper room becomes a gas chamber, and Cecilia and Parker now have to fight amongst themselves to put their head through a vent into the fresh air. Both John and Amanda have the keys to their shackles, and they release themselves and exit the facility with Carlos. Parker succumbs to the gas, and Cecilia is last seen with her head hanging out the vent flap, but we don't really find out what her fate is. It's a bit of a weird ending, to be honest. First of all, I didn't think the twist was great, and it didn't get me out of the chair like the finale of many aforementioned Saw films. And then John, Amanda, and a random young Mexican boy walk out of the building arm in arm like some kind of strange dysfunctional family. I'm glad I did stay till the end though, until after the credits, as John and Hoffman, who appears out of absolutely nowhere, have strung up Henry, who had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, in the original bathroom with some razor blade trap, which we don't really get to see the end of. Again, a much more Saw-like ending, I think, but I don't know how I feel about it. Was Hoffman just shoehorned in there so that this new installment followed the canon of Hoffman being there since the start, but kept under wraps? I also don't know if I want my beloved bathroom from Saw 1 being tarred with the same brush as Saw 10, but you know, we'll go with it. But I'm a little bit torn, to be honest, guys. Overall, well worth a watch, I think, purely just to delve into the makeup of Jigsaw and his human side a bit more. The traps were decent and not overly outlandish at all, which completely fits with the earlier films, which were more gritty and basic. But the series did appear tired in places once again, and in my opinion, Amanda just stuck out like a sore thumb. She didn't slot in seamlessly into this installment like John did, and I think the overall story was very random. They didn't seem to take anything from the original 2 Saw films to create this storyline, other than the fact that John has cancer. It was 2 beloved characters who were lifted from there and somehow ended up in Mexico City. And it pains me to say it, but let's just leave Saw to rest now. It's over, it's done. Let Shawnee and Tobin enjoy their retirement and it'll be alright. But I want to hear your thoughts and opinions, guys. What do you think about Saw 10 or Saw X in the context of the Saw franchise? Do you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Let me know all your thoughts and opinions down in the comments. I've been your host, Hugh from Unleash the Ghouls, and I'll see you next time for another honest review.